Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Mark's hasty exit, marked by the resounding slam of the dorm door, ushered Lucien into an unexpected solitude that morning. The room's tranquility, disturbed only by the persistent ticking of the alarm, emphasized the absence of Mark's presence. Lucien, an athlete in the making, with his toned physique and auburn locks, contemplated his day's agenda, a choice between rigorous training and overdue slumber. That's when a stray thought jerked his attention to an unusual object in the room's corner. A suitcase, its navy hue contrasting with the room's mundane hues, stirred Lucien's interest. He remembered a vague snippet of conversation with Mark about his sister's brief stay, but with the track meet looming, he'd barely noticed her. As he approached the suitcase, his curiosity battled with respect for its owner's privacy. Did she leave this behind? He pondered, his touch light on the suitcase's zipper, undecided on his next course of action. Eventually the latter won out, and he carefully unzipped the case. The contents caught him off guard. Neatly folded inside were an array of feminine clothes, blouses, skirts, and dresses in various colors and styles. Lucien's heart rate quickened as he gingerly lifted a pleated navy skirt from the pile. The fabric felt soft and delicate in his calloused hands, a stark contrast to the rough polyester of his track uniform. Before he could talk himself out of it, Lucien found himself slipping off his pajama bottoms and stepping into the skirt. He pulled it up over his narrow hips, surprised at how naturally it seemed to fit. Turning to the full-length mirror on the back of the door, he couldn't help but gasp at his reflection. The navy skirt fell just above his knees, accentuating the lean muscles of his legs in a way his usual shorts never did. Lucien's hands smoothed down the pleats, marveling at how the fabric swished and moved with each subtle movement. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from his life. Emboldened by this newfound feeling, Lucien reached back into the suitcase and pulled out a crisp white blouse. He shrugged off his t-shirt and slipped the blouse on, fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar buttons. As he fastened the last one, he looked back at his reflection and felt his breath catch in his throat. The person staring back at him wasn't Lucien the track star, but someone entirely new, someone he'd buried deep inside for far too long. The white blouse complemented the navy skirt perfectly, creating a classic feminine silhouette that stirred something profound within him. Gianna, he whispered, the name falling from his lips unbidden. It felt right, as if he'd finally found a missing piece of himself. The sound of voices in the hallway snapped Lucien back to reality. Panic surged through him as he quickly shed the blouse and skirt, hastily folding them and returning them to the suitcase. By the time Mark returned from his classes, Lucien was back in his track sweats, pretending to study at his desk. But the memory of that moment in front of the mirror lingered, haunting his thoughts throughout the day. During track practice, as he sprinted around the oval, Lucien found his mind wandering back to the feeling of the skirt swishing around his legs. The familiar burn in his muscles as he pushed himself to go faster seemed somehow hollow now, as if he were running away from something rather than toward it. That night, after Mark had fallen asleep, Lucien crept out of bed and quietly unzipped the suitcase once more. This time, he selected a soft, powder blue sweater and a knee-length black skirt. As he slipped them on, a sense of calm washed over him. He spent hours in front of the mirror, studying his reflection and experimenting with different poses and movements. For weeks, this became Lucien's nightly ritual. While his roommate slept, he would transform into Gianna, exploring this newfound part of himself in the safety of darkness. He began to notice subtle changes in his behavior during the day, a softening of his movements, a gentler tone in his voice. His teammates on the track team commented on his improved form, unaware that it stemmed from hours spent practicing a more graceful gait in heels. As the semester progressed, Lucian found it increasingly difficult to maintain his dual identities. The thrill of sprinting down the track paled in comparison to the joy he felt when dressed as Gianna. He began to withdraw from his friends on the team, making excuses to skip post-practice hangouts in favor of rushing back to the dorm and his secret wardrobe. One evening, as Lucien sat at his desk, struggling to focus on an assignment, Mark cleared his throat.
"Hey man, is everything okay? You've seemed different lately."
Lucien's heart raced, fear gripping him as he wondered if his roommate had somehow discovered his secret.
"What do you mean?"
he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mark shrugged.
"I don't know. You're just not around as much, and when you are, you seem distracted. Is something going on with the team?"
Relief flooded through Lucian, followed quickly by a pang of guilt. He realized he'd been so caught up in his own internal struggle that he hadn't considered how his behavior might affect others. "I've just been doing some self-reflection lately," Lucian said carefully, "trying to figure some things out." Mark nodded sympathetically. "I get it, man. College is a time for figuring yourself out. Just remember, I'm here if you ever want to talk." Lucian managed a small smile, touched by his roommate's concern. "Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that." That night, as Lucien, or rather Gianna, stood in front of the mirror in a flowing emerald green dress, she made a decision. It was time to stop hiding, to embrace her true self fully and without shame. The next morning, Lucien woke early and carefully packed a bag with some of the feminine clothes he'd grown to love. He left a note for Mark, explaining that he needed some time away to sort things out, and promising to be in touch soon. With a deep breath, Lucien shouldered his bag and stepped out of the dorm room. Instead of heading to the track as he usually would, he made his way to the campus LGBT Resource Center. His heart pounded as he pushed open the door, but the warm smile of the counselor inside helped ease his nerves.
"Hello,"
Lucien said softly. "My name is Gianna, and I think I need some help." Over the next few months, Gianna worked closely with the counselor and support group at the center. She learned about hormone therapy options, legal name changes, and the myriad other aspects of transitioning. More importantly, she found a community of people who understood and accepted her for who she truly was. Gradually, Gianna began to make changes in her public life. She grew out her auburn hair, experimenting with different styles that framed her increasingly feminine features. She traded her track sweats for A-line skirts and elegant dresses, reveling in the freedom to express herself authentically. The day Gianna decided to return to the track team was both terrifying and exhilarating. She'd kept in touch with her coach throughout her absence, but this would be the first time her teammates would see her as her true self. Dressed in a flattering navy blue athletic skirt and a fitted white top, she made her way to the field, her heart pounding harder than it ever had before a race. As she approached, conversations died down, and all eyes turned to her. For a moment, Gianna felt paralyzed by fear. Then, her former co-captain stepped forward.
"Welcome back,"
he said warmly, extending his hand.
"We've missed you on the team."
Relief washed over Gianna as she shook his hand, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. One by one, Her teammates came forward to greet her, offering words of support and encouragement. While there were a few awkward moments and stumbled pronouns, the overall reception was far more positive than she'd dared to hope. As weeks passed, Gianna found a new rhythm in her life. She still loved the thrill of competition, but now she competed in women's events, her graceful strides carrying her swiftly around the track. Off the field, she embraced her femininity fully, her wardrobe evolving to reflect her true identity. One sunny afternoon, as Gianna strolled across campus in a flowing lavender sundress, she ran into Mark. There was a moment of awkward recognition before Mark's face broke into a warm smile.
"Gianna,"
he said, testing out the name.
"It suits you."
Gianna felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was still figuring things out myself." Mark shook his head.
"No apologies necessary. I'm just glad you found yourself. And hey, my sister was wondering what happened to that suitcase she left behind. I guess now we know,"
he added with a wink. Gianna laughed, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I owe her big time. That suitcase changed my life." As they parted ways, Gianna felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the scared, confused Lucian trying on a skirt in secret to the confident woman she was today, every step had been necessary. She smoothed down her lavender dress, enjoying the familiar swish of fabric against her legs, and continued on her way, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. The campus buzzed with activity as Gianna made her way to her next class. She'd switched her major from sports science to gender studies, finding a new passion in understanding and advocating for transgender rights. As she walked, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances and occasional double takes from students who remembered her as Lucian. But where once those looks would have filled her with dread, now she held her head high, confident in who she was. Gianna slipped into the lecture hall, smoothing her lavender dress as she took a seat near the front. As she pulled out her notebook, a young woman with short, spiky hair plopped down in the chair next to her. "Hey, I'm Riley," the woman said, offering a friendly smile. "I love your dress, by the way. Lavender is such a great color on you." Gianna felt a warmth bloom in her chest. It was still a novelty to receive compliments on her appearance, especially from other women. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "I'm Gianna. It's nice to meet you." As the professor began the lecture, Gianna found herself stealing glances at Riley. There was something about her easy confidence and warm demeanor that drew Gianna in. When class ended, Riley turned to her with a grin. "So, Gianna, a bunch of us usually grab coffee after this class. Want to join?" For a moment, Gianna hesitated. Social situations still made her nervous sometimes, the fear of being clocked as trans never entirely gone. But looking at Riley's open, inviting expression, she made a decision. "I'd love to," Gianna said, returning the smile. The campus coffee shop was bustling when they arrived. Gianna followed Riley to a table where several other students from their class were already seated. As introductions were made, Gianna felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach. But as the conversation flowed, touching on everything from class discussions to campus gossip, she found herself relaxing.
"So, Gianna,"
one of the guys at the table asked during a lull in the conversation,
"have you always been interested in gender studies? You seem really passionate about it in class."
Gianna took a sip of her latte, using the moment to gather her thoughts. Actually, no, she said finally. I used to be on the track team, but let's just say I had some personal experiences that made me realize how important these issues are. She braced herself for further questions, but Riley smoothly steered the conversation in another direction, shooting Gianna a subtle wink. As the afternoon wore on, Gianna found herself laughing and engaging more than she had in months. For the first time since her transition, she felt truly accepted as just another one of the girls. As the group began to disperse, Riley hung back. "Hey, I hope this isn't too forward," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "But would you maybe want to grab dinner sometime? Just the two of us?" Gianna felt her heart skip a beat. Was Riley asking her out? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. I'd like that," she found herself saying. Riley's face lit up. "Great! How about Friday night? There's this amazing little Italian place just off campus." As they exchanged numbers, Gianna felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She'd never been on a date as Gianna before. What if Riley didn't know she was trans? Should she tell her up front? These thoughts swirled in Gianna's mind as she made her way back to her dorm room. She'd moved out of the shared room with Mark and into a single, giving her the privacy she needed as she continued her transition. Closing the door behind her, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The person looking back at her was so different from the Lucian of just a few months ago. Her auburn hair now fell in soft waves past her shoulders, framing a face that had softened with hormone therapy. The lavender dress hugged curves that were gradually becoming more pronounced. But more than the physical changes, it was the light in her eyes that struck her. A confidence and contentment that had been missing for so long. Gianna took a deep breath, smoothing her hands down the front of her dress. She had a date to prepare for, and a whole new chapter of her life to embrace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she was finally on the right path, the path to being her true self. As Friday evening approached, Gianna found herself standing in front of her closet, agonizing over what to wear. She'd never had to dress for a date before, at least not as herself. Her hand hovered over a slinky black dress before moving to a more conservative blue blouse and skirt combo. In the end, she settled on a knee-length emerald green wrap dress that accentuated her developing curves while still feeling comfortable. Gianna spent extra time on her makeup, carefully applying foundation to cover the slight shadow on her jaw, then adding a touch of blush to her cheeks and a swipe of mascara to her lashes. As she put the finishing touches on her lipstick, she caught sight of her reflection and paused. The woman staring back at her was beautiful, confident, everything she'd always dreamed of being. With trembling hands, she clasped a delicate silver necklace around her neck, a gift from her mother when she'd finally worked up the courage to come out to her parents. The memory of that day, filled with tears and hugs and whispered words of acceptance, gave her strength. At precisely 7 p.m., there was a knock on her door. Gianna took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one last time, and opened it to find Riley standing there, looking stunning in a tailored black pantsuit. "Wow," Riley breathed, her eyes widening as she took in Gianna's appearance. "You look amazing." Gianna felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "So do you." As they walked to the restaurant, Gianna found herself relaxing in Riley's presence. Their conversation flowed easily, covering topics from their shared classes to their favorite books and movies. By the time they were seated at a cozy table in the dimly lit Italian restaurant, Gianna felt more at ease than she had in years. Over plates of steaming pasta and glasses of red wine, they delved deeper into each other's lives. Riley spoke about her passion for environmental activism and her dreams of working for a non-profit after graduation. Gianna listened, enraptured by Riley's enthusiasm and the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her goals. When the conversation turned to Gianna, she hesitated for a moment. Taking a deep breath, she decided to be honest.
"Riley, there's something I need to tell you,"
Gianna said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I'm transgender. I hope that doesn't change anything, but I understand if it does."
Riley reached across the table, gently taking Gianna's hand in hers.
"Gianna, I know,"
she said softly. "And it doesn't change a thing. I asked you out because I think you're an amazing, beautiful woman. Your journey is part of what makes you who you are, and I admire your courage." Tears welled up in Gianna's eyes, a mix of relief and joy washing over her.
"Thank you,"
she whispered, squeezing Riley's hand. "You have no idea how much that means to me." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, shared confidences, and lingering glances. As they walked back to campus, hand in hand, Gianna felt a sense of possibility she'd never experienced before. When they reached her dorm, Riley turned to face her.
"I had a wonderful time tonight,"
Riley said, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight.
"Can I see you again?"
Gianna nodded, a shy smile playing on her lips.
"I'd like that very much."
Slowly, Riley leaned in, giving Gianna plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. Instead, Gianna closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a soft, sweet kiss. It was everything Gianna had ever dreamed a first kiss would be, tender, exciting, and full of promise. As they parted, both slightly breathless, Gianna felt as though her heart might burst with happiness.
"Good night, Riley,"
she said softly. "Good night, Gianna," Riley replied, giving her hand one last squeeze before turning to leave. Gianna watched her go, then entered her room, closing the door behind her. She leaned against it, closing her eyes and reliving every moment of the evening. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and accepted for who she was. Not as Lucien pretending to be someone he wasn't, not as a trans woman struggling to fit in, but as Gianna, whole and complete. As she carefully removed her emerald green dress and hung it back in her closet, Gianna caught sight of the old navy blue suitcase tucked away in the corner. She smiled, remembering the day she'd first opened it and how it had set her on this incredible journey. Slipping into her favorite silk nightgown, Gianna crawled into bed, her mind full of dreams for the future. She knew there would still be challenges ahead. There always were in life. But for the first time, she felt truly equipped to face them. With her growing confidence, the support of friends like Riley, and the love of her family, Gianna knew she could handle anything that came her way.
Thanks for watching my girlies.
As she
Be
drifted
sure to
off
check
to
out
sleep,
Patreon for more.
a contented smile